Hello and welcome to the Game Codex. I'm your host, Alora, and I'm here to crack open the case files on video gaming's biggest mysteries, trends, and triumphs. Today, we're talking about a ghost story, a tale of impending doom that was whispered in dark forums and prophesized in gaming articles for years. They called it the Indiepocalypse. A terrifying time when the market would be so flooded with indie games that they'd all sink to the bottom of the digital sea, never to be seen again. The sky was falling. The chickens were, well, they were also indie games, I guess. But here's the twist in our story. The Indiepocalypse never actually happened. In fact, the indie scene is more vibrant, diverse, and successful than ever. So what gives? Were the doomsayers just wrong? Or did something miraculous happen? In this episode, we're going to grab our archaeological trowels and dig up the truth. We'll debunk the myth, explore how indie games not only survived, but learned to thrive. And we'll find out what it really takes to make it in the wild world of games today. Stick around, because we're about to prove that reports of the indie game's death were greatly exaggerated. Picture this. It's 2022. We're in an era of hyper-realistic graphics, where games are boasting about the individual pores on a character's face. Ray tracing is the buzzword of the day. And then onto the scene slouches a little game called Vampire Survivors. Let's be real. If you showed this game to a time traveler from 2002, they'd say, yeah, that tracks. It looks simple. The gameplay is even simpler. You move your character. That's it. You don't even attack. Your character auto-attacks, and your job is to just avoid the thousands of monsters swarming the screen. It's less of a traditional game and more of a watch numbers go up simulator. You collect experience gems, level up, choose new weapons, and evolve them. And before you know it, your screen is an absolute, beautiful, incomprehensible mess. It's a fireworks display of your own making, and it is hypnotically satisfying. So how did this, a game made by one person in their spare time, a game that looks like it was made for a browser in 2005, become one of the highest rated and most played games on Steam? How did it win a BAFTA? How did it spawn an entire genre of bullet heaven games? The secret isn't in the graphics. It's in the design. Vampire Survivors is a masterclass in what game theorists call a compulsion loop. Every 30 seconds, you're making a meaningful choice. Every minute, you're seeing your power skyrocket. Every run, even a failed run, lasts just long enough to make you think, just one more try. I can do better. It's the gaming equivalent of potato chips. You can't have just one, or in this case, you can't have just one run. But its success also points to something bigger in the indie scene. It's proof that in 2024, you don't need a Hollywood budget. You don't need to chase graphical fidelity. What you need is a single, brilliant, addictive idea executed with passion. Vampire Survivors is the ultimate underdog story. It reminded everyone that at the heart of every great game is a core gameplay loop that has to be fun. And it proved that if you nail that, the world will beat a path to your very simple, very pixelated door. And that, my friends, is the perfect paradox to kick off our story. But it also raises a big question. When a game made by one person can achieve this level of success, what exactly does indie even mean anymore? Ah, the I word. Indie. It used to be so simple. Independent, as in not owned by a giant publisher. It was the scrappy garage band of the gaming world. But in 2024, the definition has gotten fuzzier than a tribble. Let's break it down. On one end of the spectrum, you have the pure, artisanal, I made this in my basement while living on cup noodles indie. Think of Eric Barone, who single-handedly created Stardew Valley over 4.5 years. That's the classic indie dream. But then you have wildly successful teams like Supergiant Games who make gorgeous, critically adored games like Hades. They're independent, they're not owned by anyone, but they're not exactly a small, unknown studio anymore. Are they still indie? And what about a game that is funded by a giant corporation? If a small team gets a publishing deal from Devolver Digital or gets a fat check from the Epic Game Store for exclusivity, are they still indie? What if Microsoft pays to put their game on Game Pass day one? Does that indie crad get revoked? Do we take away their vintage, thick-rimmed glasses? I think we need to stop thinking of indie as a binary yes or no switch and start thinking of it as a slider. On one end of the spectrum, you have the scale of the team and the source of the funding. On the other, you have the spirit of the project. Is it a personal, creative vision? Is it taking a risk that a big publisher would be too scared to greenlight? A game can be made by 50 people and still have an indie heart. And a game made by one person can be a cynical asset flip designed to make a quick buck on Steam. So for our purposes today, when I say indie, I'm talking about that spirit, the spirit of creativity, risk, and passion that exists outside of the blockbuster, boardroom-driven model. It's less about who signs the checks and more about who follows their weird, wonderful gut. So let's talk about this so-called Indiepocalypse. Around 2015, a panic started to spread through the gaming world. The reasoning went like this. Tools like Unity are making it too easy to make games. Digital storefronts are making it too easy to publish them. The market is going to be flooded with thousands of new games every year. It'll be impossible to stand out. The bubble will burst. We're all doomed. It was a classic case of predicting a traffic jam because they invented too many cars, without considering that they might also invent, highways, GPS, and ride-sharing apps. The fear was understandable, but it was based on a flawed premise, that the demand for games was a fixed pie, and every new game was just a smaller slice for everyone else. But entertainment doesn't work like that. The audience isn't static. A fantastic new game doesn't just take players from another game. It can create new players. It can expand the entire pie. The Indiepocalypse prophecy failed to account for a few key things. First, while yes, it's easier to make a game, it's still astronomically hard to make a good one. The barrier to entry lowered, but the barrier to quality remained gloriously high. Second, it underestimated the players. Gamers aren't mindless consumers, they're curators. They have an incredible knack for finding diamonds in the rough, for championing underdogs, and for creating communities around the games they love. Word of mouth in the internet age is a superpower. The Indiepocalypse wasn't an apocalypse. It was a filter. It separated the passionate creators from the get-rich-quick schemers. It didn't kill indie games. It forced the scene to evolve, to get smarter, and to find new ways to connect with audiences. The sky wasn't falling. We were just learning how to build taller ladders. In the olden days, like 2005, if you made a game, your options for selling it were limited. You had to get a box on a shelf at a Walmart. Good luck with that. Today, it's a different world. We live in the era of the digital storefront, and it's like a giant, never-closing mall. And in this mall, there's one anchor tenant that is so massive, it's basically its own city: Steam. Valve's platform is the undisputed king. For most PC gamers, it's the first and last stop. It has the biggest audience, the most features, and the legendary Steam sale, a holiday season where our wallets go to die a glorious discount-driven death. But a monopoly isn't always healthy, and so we've seen challengers emerge. The most prominent is the Epic Game Store, the new money mall that's trying to buy your loyalty. How? By throwing Fortnite money at developers for exclusives and by giving away free games every week. Love it or hate it, it's created competition, and competition gives developers more options and more leverage. Then you have a place like GOG, which is the charming niche antique store in our digital mall. GOG stands for Good Old Games, and they specialize in DRM-free classics and modern titles. They appeal to the purist, the preservationist, the person who believes you should truly own the games you buy. And we can't forget the console storefronts: PlayStation Network, Nintendo eShop, Xbox Marketplace, and even stores like itch.io, which is like the indie artist's co-op, filled with weird, experimental, and deeply personal games you won't find anywhere else. This ecosystem is vital. While Steam is dominant, the existence of these other storefronts means a developer isn't putting all their eggs in one basket. They can shop their game around, make deals, and find the audience that best fits their project. It's a crowded mall for sure, but it's a mall with many doors, and that's a good thing. So how did we get to this point where a single person can make a Vampire Survivors? The secret sauce, the great equalizer, has been the Dame engine. And I'm not just talking about fancy software, I'm talking about the democratization of power. Once upon a time, if you wanted to make a game, you had to write your own engine from scratch. It was like building a car from the wheels up before you could even think about going for a drive. It was hard, tedious, and limited to programming wizards. Then came engines like Unity and Unreal. Think of these as the ultimate prefabbed car chassis. Unity became the go-to for smaller teams and 2D games. It's the reliable, versatile Honda Civic of game engines. It's relatively easy to learn and has a massive community. Unreal Engine, on the other hand, is the hyper-advanced supercar chassis. It's the engine that powers the biggest AAA blockbusters, but Epic made a brilliant move. They made it accessible to indies with a royalty model that only kicks in after you're successful. So now a tiny team can have the same graphical firepower as a multi-million-dollar studio. It's like a local bakery suddenly getting access to the same ovens as a Parisian patisserie. These engines come with everything: physics systems, lighting, animation tools, the works. They have vast asset stores where you can buy pre-made art, sound, and code, so you don't have to create every single blade of grass yourself. This has lowered the technical barrier so dramatically that now the most important skill isn't necessarily elite programming, it's game design, it's vision, it's the ability to use these incredible, accessible tools to create something unique and compelling. The engine is the brush, but the developer is still the artist. In a world that often feels like it's on fire, is it any surprise that we're all desperately looking for a digital hug? Enter the cozy game, a genre that has exploded from a niche interest into a powerhouse segment of the indie market. This is the genre of soft colors, gentle music, and low-stakes goals. The godfather of the modern cozy movement is, without a doubt, Stardew Valley. It took the formula of Harvest Moon and polished it into a perfect gem. It's a game about farming, yes, but also about community, friendship, and building a life. It was a one-person passion project that resonated with millions. Then Nintendo's Animal Crossing New Horizons dropped at the perfect moment, the start of a global pandemic, and gave us all a peaceful island escape. It was a corporate-made game with an indie soul, and it showed the massive mainstream appetite for this kind of experience. Now, we're seeing a whole wave of games following this path. Games like Palia, which is a massive, free-to-play, cozy MMO. Think about that, a massively multiplayer online game where the primary goal is to decorate your house and go fishing with friends. It's genius. The cozy boom proves a vital point about the indie scene. It's incredibly responsive to audience desires. Big publishers are often chasing the same gritty, action-packed fantasies, but indies can tap into underserved markets. They saw that players were stressed, anxious, and craving comfort, and they built entire worlds to provide it. The cozy boom isn't just a trend, it's a testament to the empathy and connection that indie games can foster. For every Vampire Survivors that comes out of nowhere, there's a Hades or an Among Us, games that followed a more traditional path to success, but with a brilliant twist. Let's talk about Hades. Supergiant Games was already a respected indie studio, but Hades launched them into the stratosphere. It's a perfect fusion of style and substance. It combined the addictive one more run loop of a roguelike with a compelling ongoing narrative where death wasn't a failure, but a plot point. The art was stunning, the voice acting was top tier, and the gameplay was as smooth as butter. It was a masterpiece that showed an indie could not just compete with AAA games, but outclass them in almost every way. Then there's Among Us. This is perhaps the funniest story in modern gaming. It was a game that came out in 2018 to a collective meh. Then in 2020, thanks to streamers and a global population stuck at home looking for ways to connect, it became a worldwide phenomenon. It was a reminder that timing, community, and the power of content creators can resurrect a game from the dead. Among Us wasn't a new game. It was a dormant volcano that suddenly erupted. What do these breakout hits teach us? They show that there are multiple blueprints for success. For Hades, it was about polished perfection. For Among Us, it was about social dynamics and the power of the stream. But both required a rock-solid, brilliant core idea. You can't stream a boring game into popularity, and you can't polish a bad idea into a gem. These games had the it factor, and the ecosystem of 2024 was able to recognize it and elevate it to iconic status. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. Passion is great, but you can't pay your rent with indie spirit. You need money. So how does an indie developer fund their cup noodle-fueled dream? The first modern wave was Kickstarter. This was the era of going directly to the fans and saying, "Believe in this idea with me." It gave us classics like Shovel Knight and Undertale. It's a high-risk, high-reward path. You have to market your game before it even exists, and you're accountable to 1,000 backers who all have opinions. It's like trying to build a plane while you're already flying it, with the passengers shouting design suggestions from the cabin. Then there are indie publishers. Not the giant EAs of the world, but specialized curator-style publishers like Devolver Digital, Annapurna Interactive, and Team 17. These guys are like the A&R scouts of the gaming world. They find talented developers, give them funding and marketing support, and help them navigate the tricky parts of publishing. In return, they take a cut of the sales. It's a partnership that can make the difference between obscurity and success. And then we have the new kid on the block, the Game Pass deal. Microsoft's Netflix-style subscription service has become a major funding source. They pay a developer a lump sum, sometimes a very, very large one, to put their game on Game Pass at launch. For the developer, it's a huge financial safety net. They get paid up front, and they get exposure to millions of subscribers. For the player, it's an incredible deal. It's a win-win that has fundamentally changed the calculus for many indie studios. The path to funding is no longer a single narrow road. It's a multi-lane highway with on-ramps for every type of vehicle. So, you've made a great game. You've secured funding, it's on Steam. Now you just sit back and watch the money roll in, right? Wrong. You have just arrived at the single biggest challenge for any indie developer in 2024. Discoverability. Imagine throwing a single, beautifully decorated pebble into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and hoping someone finds it. That's what launching a game on Steam can feel like. With dozens of new games releasing every single day, how do you get noticed? This is where modern marketing comes in. It's no longer enough to just make a game. You have to be a community manager, a content creator, and a social media savant. Streamers and YouTubers are kingmakers. A single shout out from a popular streamer can launch a game into the stratosphere, as we saw with Among Us. Developers now often send out early demo keys to creators, hoping their game will catch that lightning in a bottle. Going viral on platforms like TikTok and Twitter is the holy grail. A clever clip, a funny glitch, or a unique art style can get millions of views and drive insane amounts of traffic to your store page. And then there's the Steam algorithm itself. a mysterious digital god that decides which games get shown on the front page. It favors games with strong wishlist numbers, positive reviews, and concurrent players. So developers run demos during Steam Next Fests. They do everything they can to get those initial wishlists, because cracking the algorithm is the key to visibility. The final boss of indie development isn't a dragon or a dark lord. It's the endless scroll of a storefront. Beating it requires a great game, yes, but also a hefty dose of luck, timing, and marketing hustle. So where do we go from here? The indie scene is healthy, but it's never static. The frontier is always moving. First, let's talk about the elephant in the room, AI tools. AI is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a terrifying force that threatens creative jobs. On the other, it's a potential power-up for tiny teams. Imagine a solo developer using AI to generate concept art, to code repetitive tasks, or to create dynamic dialogue. Used ethically as an assistant, not a replacement, AI could lower the barriers to creation even further, allowing developers to focus more on design and vision. Then there's virtual and augmented reality. VR is still a relatively niche and expensive market, but it's ripe for indie innovation. The most creative and weird VR experiences often come from small teams willing to experiment with new forms of gameplay. As the hardware becomes more accessible, this could be the next great playground for indies. And we're seeing new forms of games altogether. The line between game, social space, and digital hobby is blurring. Look at games like Kind Words, where you just write nice letters to strangers. It's barely a game at all, but it fulfills a deep human need. The future of indie games isn't just about better graphics or new genres. It's about finding new ways to make us feel, to connect, and to play. The spirit of indie is the spirit of exploration, and that spirit is heading into some incredibly exciting and unknown territories. And there you have it. From the panic of the Indiepocalypse to the triumphant success stories of today, the indie scene hasn't just survived, it has evolved, diversified, and solidified itself as the beating, creative heart of the entire video game industry. It's an ecosystem powered by accessible tools, funded by a mix of passionate fans and savvy publishers, and discovered through the chaotic, wonderful power of community. The challenges are real, especially the discoverability puzzle, but the opportunities for creative, unique, and personal games have never been greater. The Indiepocalypse was a myth because it assumed a static world, but the world of indie games is the opposite of static. It's dynamic, resilient, and endlessly creative. It's a story not of an ending, but of a never-ending renaissance. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Game Codex. If you have an indie game you love, shout it out in the comments below. Let's help with that discoverability. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of gaming. Until next time, keep playing and keep supporting the dreamers.